Welcome to today's Explainer. We're jumping right into a totally fascinating intersection today, right where complex genetics, true crime, and the deepest mysteries of human behavior all collide. I am so thrilled to take you on this journey. We are going to unpack some genuinely groundbreaking research. We'll look at real-world case studies, and we'll see exactly how our evolving understanding of biology is challenging, well, pretty much everything we thought we knew about criminal behavior. Let's get started.
So, this brings us directly to the core mystery we are unraveling today. Think about it. Can a single gene actually make someone violent? For decades, the media has been completely obsessed with this idea of a born criminal. I mean, we've all seen the dramatic headlines suggesting that our DNA might just be an inescapable blueprint for violence. But what does the actual science say when we strip away all that hype? To really understand the hype, we need to look at how scientific findings can sometimes just spiral out of control. Back in 2006, a study was conducted on a grand total of just 17 Maori men in New Zealand. It suggested they carried a specific genetic variant linked to risk-taking behavior. Well, almost overnight, sensationalist headlines blew this way out of proportion. They implied an entire population was genetically hardwired for crime, and boom, the infamous warrior gene myth was born. So, how on earth did this one specific gene become the center of such a massive controversy? Case File 1, the Dutch family mutation. Okay, let's dive into this by traveling back to a 1993 discovery that really kicked this whole thing off. Here's the who and the what of the situation. Scientists became incredibly interested in this large Dutch family where 14 of the male members exhibited a deeply troubling pattern. Whenever they felt angry or fearful or even just frustrated, they would react with these totally unpredictable, explosive outbursts of aggression. Researchers obviously wanted to know, why did this specific family have such a highly concentrated history of severe impulsivity and violence? What researchers found at the molecular level was absolutely astounding. These men had a rare nonsense mutation, basically a complete genetic knockout in a gene called MAOA. Now, this gene is normally responsible for producing an enzyme that breaks down neurotransmitters in the brain. But because their MAOA gene was essentially broken, they experienced a severe buildup of these chemicals in the brain. This condition is what we now know as Brunner syndrome. So, this discovery successfully established a real link between the MAOA gene and aggressive behavior, which is huge. But, and this is absolutely crucial, we have to look at the limitations here. First off, Brunner syndrome is extremely rare. And more importantly, this was an isolated, anecdotal case in a single family. You simply cannot take a rare, complete genetic mutation from one family and use it as a sweeping, generalizable explanation for everyday criminality across all of society. It just doesn't work that way. Case File 2, the New Zealand cohort. To truly understand human behavior, we have to move past isolated clinical anomalies and look at massive population studies. We need to make a really strong distinction here between anecdotal evidence and robust scientific evidence. While studying a rare mutation in a single family gives us a great starting point, it doesn't prove a universal theory. To get real scientific evidence that actually applies broadly, researchers have to track huge groups of people over long periods of time to find consistent patterns. And that brings us to the landmark Dunedin study, led by Dr. Avshalom Caspi. Just look at the massive scale of this research. They literally tracked over 1,000 children born in New Zealand in 1972. They meticulously recorded their environments as they grew up, specifically noting who suffered severe maltreatment during childhood. Then, they followed up with them at age 26 to assess criminal convictions and antisocial behavior. They weren't just looking at genetics anymore. They were looking for what truly causes violence in the real world. Now, what's really fascinating here is the interaction this table reveals. If you look at the individuals with the low MAOA gene variant, they didn't just automatically become violent. If they experienced zero childhood maltreatment, their antisocial behavior was actually low. The low MAOA gene only led to high antisocial behavior when it was combined with severe childhood abuse. It's like a lock and a key. This brilliantly illustrates the biological pathway. When you combine that low MAOA variant with the spark of a highly adverse environment, it literally biases the development of neural systems. This leads to a hyperactive amygdala, the emotion and fear center of the brain, and an underactive prefrontal cortex. The biological end result? Decreased impulse control and a significantly increased likelihood of an aggressive response when provoked. This study was a massive breakthrough precisely because it proved gene-environment interaction. It showed us that genes act way more like volume knobs, adjusting our sensitivities, rather than some inescapable blueprint dictating our every action. Of course, there are limitations here as well. Scientists still debate exactly how to define and measure an adverse environment, since that can get pretty subjective when you compare different studies.
Case File 3: The Neuroscientist's Brain. To see exactly how environment can step in and moderate genetics, we have a stunning, highly personal case study to look at. Who is our subject? Dr. James Fallon, a distinguished neuroscientist at UC Irvine. And what happened to him is honestly straight out of a thriller. In 2005, Dr. Fallon was blindly reviewing 2 stacks of brain scans. One stack was from highly violent psychopathic murderers, and the other was a control group of his own family members. He found a deeply pathological scan sitting right there in the normal pile. But when he unblinded the code to see who it belonged to, he discovered the psychopath brain scan was his own. No way, right?
Dr. Fallon was using PET scans which visualize actual brain activity, and his own scan showed a chilling lack of metabolic activity in the orbital prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. These are the exact neurological territories that are absolutely critical for empathy, emotional regulation, and suppressing dark impulses. And it gets crazier. Further testing revealed he also carried the low-activity MAOA variant we've been talking about. So why wasn't Dr. Fallon a violent criminal? Despite his high genetic risk and that deeply troubling brain scan, he lived a successful, entirely non-criminal life. He credits this entirely to growing up in a wonderfully supportive, nurturing, abuse-free environment. His childhood protected him. But remember our earlier rule, this is a powerful story? Absolutely. But it remains a single anecdotal case study. It's an N of 1 that beautifully illustrates a broader concept, but doesn't scientifically prove it all on its own. Case File 4: Genetics in the Courtroom. Let's move to our final act and see how this all builds into a very real matter of life, death, and justice. As you might imagine, discoveries about the MAOA gene haven't exactly stayed confined to biology labs. Defense attorneys are now eagerly dragging this research right into the courtroom. They are arguing that if a client has the low MAOA variant, along with a documented history of childhood abuse, they biologically have a reduced capacity to control their behavior. Let's trace how courts have actually handled this over time. Back in 1995, in the Mobley case, a judge flatly denied a request to test the defendant for the MAOA mutation, and he was eventually executed. But look at 2009. In Italy, a judge actually reduced a defendant's sentence by an entire year, specifically citing his MAOA genetics. That very same year in the US, the Waldrop jury used MAOA and abuse evidence to reduce a charge from first-degree murder down to voluntary manslaughter. They literally saved the defendant from the death penalty based on this science. This introduces a profound, incredibly complex ethical dilemma. If our actions are heavily shaped by a combination of genetics and the trauma we endured as children, factors we literally didn't choose, how do we accurately assign legal blame? Now, on the other hand, many argue genetics shouldn't reduce the gravity of a crime or protect perpetrators from punishment whatsoever, strongly emphasizing that the justice system's primary job is to protect society. It's a tough debate.
Predisposition, not determinism.
This brings our explainer to a powerful, overarching conclusion about human nature and all the science we've explored today. The absolute most crucial point to take away from all of this is that we must abandon the myth of genetic determinism. Your DNA is not an inescapable blueprint that forces you to commit crimes. Instead, we have to embrace the reality of genetic predispositions. Genes like MAOA might establish deep biological vulnerabilities, yes, but it is our environment, our upbringing, our traumas, and the support systems we have that ultimately determines the final outcome. I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought to ponder. If we aren't born criminals, but rather these complex products shaped by both our innate biology and our childhood environments, where exactly does free will even begin? And moving forward, how should our justice system adapt to this new neurogenetic reality? Thank you so much for joining me today to explore this fascinating explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.